On a quiet street in Houston, neighbors still recall the sound of sirens the night Maria's life changed forever. Once a radiant teenager with dreams of nursing school, she now lay confined to a hospital bed, her body broken, her future stolen. Doctors saw only paralysis, but parishioners whispered of faith too fierce to be silenced. Friends remembered her laughter, her choir robes, her devotion at Sunday Mass. None could imagine that from this bed of suffering, Maria would ignite a fire of hope across America, turning pain into prayer and despair into something the world could not explain. In Houston's East End, where modest brick homes line the streets and children play basketball under the glow of street lights, Maria's story began. Her parents, first-generation Mexican-Americans, were not wealthy, but their small house carried the warmth of faith that money could never buy. Her father, Jorge, rose before dawn each day to work long shifts in construction. With sunburnt skin and calloused hands, he often joked that his strength came from tortillas and prayer. "If we can't give our kids riches," he used to say, "then let's give them roots." His roots ran deep in Catholic tradition. Every evening, no matter how tired, he would make the sign of the cross before the family meal, insisting that gratitude came before food. Her mother, Elalina, was a nurse at a local clinic. She saw suffering daily, yet her faith never wavered. Neighbors recalled how she would come home after a 12-hour shift and still gather her 9-year-old daughter in her lap, whispering prayers of protection. "God is closer than the pain," she often told Maria, planting seeds of hope that would one day blossom under fire. At St. Joseph's Parish, Maria's childhood unfolded. She was known as the quiet girl in the front pew, her dark hair pulled neatly back, her eyes fixed on the crucifix above the altar. The choir director remembered how Maria's voice, gentle yet steady, lifted during hymns, as though she were singing not to the congregation, but directly to heaven. She had something different, he would later recall, not just talent, a kind of purity that you don't forget. Her classmates noticed, too. While others ran outside after catechism class, Maria lingered to help stack hymnals or light candles before the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe. Some teased her, calling her La Monjita, the little nun. But her best friend, Anna, remembered how Maria never seemed embarrassed. She would smile and say, "It's not about me, it's about him." And somehow, even as kids, we felt she meant it. The family's financial struggles were real. Rent was often late. Groceries stretched thinner than her parents admitted. There were nights Jorge skipped dinner so the children could eat more. Yet Maria rarely complained. If anything, she seemed to sense that their poverty was a hidden gift, teaching her to rely not on possessions, but on God. One Christmas, when the family could afford no tree, Maria insisted they gather around the small nativity set her grandmother had carried from Mexico decades earlier. She arranged the tiny figures carefully, placing the baby Jesus in the center, and told her younger siblings, "This is all we need." At school, Maria was bright but unassuming. Teachers described her as diligent, respectful, the kind of student who listened more than she spoke. Yet, beneath her quiet demeanor, she carried a fire. By age 12, she confided to her mother that she wanted to dedicate her life to serving others. Perhaps as a nurse, perhaps as a missionary. Elalina, wiping dishes at the kitchen sink, felt tears blur her vision. "Mia," she said softly, "God has already claimed you." Her confessor at the parish, Father Michael, recalled how hearing Maria's first confessions was unlike those of other children. She was not careless about her soul. He explained years later, there was a depth to her sincerity. Even when she was too young to understand everything, she carried holiness like a garment she didn't know she was wearing. Neighbors noticed the same. On weekends, when other teens flocked to the mall, Maria could often be found at the parish food pantry handing out canned goods with a shy smile. Mr. Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran who volunteered beside her, said he once tried to tell her she was wasting her Saturdays. She just looked at me with those big eyes and said, "Sir, this isn't wasted. This is love." I've never forgotten that. By the time she reached high school, Maria's reputation as the church girl was firmly set. Some peers mocked her devotion, yet others secretly admired her strength. A football player once teased her for carrying a rosary in her backpack. Weeks later, when his parents were divorcing, he approached her quietly, asking if she would pray for his family. She did, and she never told a soul. Looking back, those who knew her agree there were no heavenly visions in those early years. No miracles that marked her out as extraordinary. She was simply a girl, ordinary in every outward way, who chose God when others chose distraction. Yet within her, something steady was already taking shape. A courage, a fidelity, a quiet determination that would become unshakable when life's storms arrived. And so, while Houston bustled around her with its freeways and noise, Maria grew quietly in faith. She was not chasing recognition. She was not preparing for sainthood. She was simply living the ordinary faith of an ordinary American teenager. But heaven was watching because sooner than anyone could imagine, her life would be broken open and the world would see what God had been building all along. It was a Friday evening in late spring, the kind of Texas night when the air smells faintly of barbecue and the hum of traffic never quite fades. Maria had just left youth group at St. Joseph's. She wore her favorite blue hoodie, a gift from her grandmother, and she hummed the final hymn under her breath as she climbed into her family's old sedan. Her best friend, Anna, later remembered how Maria lingered in the parking lot talking about plans for nursing school. She was glowing, Anna recalled, like the whole world was ahead of her. Minutes later, on Interstate 45, everything shattered. A pickup truck swerved unexpectedly, its driver distracted by a buzzing phone. In an instant, metal screamed against metal. The sedan spun, slammed into a guardrail, and folded like paper. Witnesses pulled over in horror, dialing 911. One man, a trucker named James, who had served in Iraq, ran toward the smoke. "I'd seen wrecks overseas," he told reporters. "But nothing prepares you for seeing a kid that young, bleeding, trapped, whispering prayers." Paramedics arrived fast. The driver of the pickup was dazed, but walked away with minor cuts. Maria, however, was pinned, motionless, her rosary tangled around her wrist. As EMTs lifted her out, she murmured a single word, "Jesus." One paramedic, a lapsed Catholic, admitted later that the sound of that name, spoken so faintly, echoed in his mind for weeks. At Bentop Hospital in Houston, surgeons worked frantically. Her spine was crushed in multiple places. Doctors spoke in hushed tones to her parents. The chances of her walking again were nearly zero. Jorge clenched his fists until his knuckles went white. Elalina collapsed against a chair, whispering Hail Marys between sobs. In the waiting room, relatives and parishioners gathered, clutching rosaries, whispering prayers in Spanish and English. The news spread quickly through St. Joseph's Parish. Maria had been in a terrible accident. When she awoke days later, tubes in her arms and a halo brace around her neck, her first instinct was denial. "I'll get better," she told the nurse. "I just need a few weeks." But weeks stretched into months, and the truth grew heavier. She was paralyzed from the shoulders down. Every doctor confirmed the same verdict. No surgery, no therapy, no miracle of science could reverse it. Friend from school visited at first, bringing balloons and awkward jokes. But slowly the visits grew fewer. "It scared us," one classmate admitted. "Seeing someone our age so broken, it forced us to think about things we didn't want to." Only Anna stayed faithfully, reading aloud from Maria's favorite psalms when silence became too heavy. Maria's own reaction swung between rage and despair. At night, she screamed into her pillow, begging God to explain. Her once bright eyes dulled, and even her parents felt the distance. "She shut us out," Elena recalled. "She wouldn't look at the crucifix on the hospital wall. She said, 'If God loves me, why did he leave me here like this?'" Father Michael, the parish priest, visited often. At first, Maria turned her face away, but he kept coming, sometimes sitting in silence for hours. One evening, he opened the Bible to the story of Job. "Even Job cursed the day he was born," he said softly. But he never stopped wrestling with God. Maybe that's faith. Not the easy answers, but the fight to keep believing. Maria didn't respond, but her tears told him she had heard. The accident rippled beyond the hospital. Neighbors organized meal trains for the family. Parishioners held a fundraiser, selling tamales in the church parking lot to help pay medical bills. Even strangers felt drawn. A trucker who witnessed the crash drove hours back to Houston just to leave flowers at the hospital chapel. For months, Maria hovered between life and resignation. Some days, she tried to laugh with nurses. Other days, she begged not to wake up. Elena remembered one night when her daughter whispered, "Mom, I'm useless now." "What's the point?" Elena, choking on her own tears, kissed her forehead and said, "Mija, your worth was never in what you could do. It's in who you are, and you are God's." Doctors marveled at her survival. By all measures, her body should have given out under infections and complications. But Maria endured, not easily, not heroically, but stubbornly day after day. And in that endurance, a strange question began to stir. If she could no longer live the life she planned, could her life still matter in another way? Her story was only beginning. From the wreckage of that night, a deeper journey was unfolding. A journey not of walking in the world, but of carrying the world in prayer from a bed that would become her altar. The first year after the accident was the hardest. Hospital walls turned into prison bars. The beeping of machines into a cruel reminder that life had changed forever. Maria had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, traveling the world to help the poor. Now she couldn't even lift a spoon to her lips. Doctors spoke of managing expectations, of quality of life. Friends spoke less and less, their voices fading as quickly as their visits. The future shrank to a single room, a bed, and the slow tick of a clock. At night, when the hospital quieted and her parents fell asleep in stiff, waiting chairs, Maria fought battles no one could see. Rage boiled her chest. Why her? Why so young? She replayed that night on Interstate 45 over and over. The headlights, the screech, the sudden silence after impact. God abandoned me, she whispered once, her face turned to the wall. Her mother, Elalina, tried to fight that despair with love. She brushed Maria's hair, sang lullabies from her own childhood in Mexico, and prayed aloud when Maria refused to. But even Elena admitted, there were nights I wondered if my faith was strong enough to carry both of us. Jorge, her father, dealt with it differently. He rarely spoke of God at all. He simply worked longer hours, paid bills, and built ramps around the house for the wheelchair Maria would soon need. If I can't heal her, he said, then I'll build a world where she can survive. But at night, when no one was watching, he would step outside, look up at the Houston sky, and ask quietly, "Why, Lord? Why my daughter?" Then came Father Michael. He refused to give up on Maria. Sometimes he read scripture at her bedside. Sometimes he sat in silence. One afternoon, he laid a small crucifix on the blanket beside her. This, he said, pointing to the cross, is not a symbol of a God who stays far away. This is the story of a God who suffers with us. You may feel abandoned, Maria, but he is on the bed with you. Maria turned her face away, but the words lingered. Weeks later, Anna, her best friend, brought a guitar to the hospital. She played softly an old church song they used to sing together in youth group. At first, Maria refused to join in, but then with a weak voice, she whispered a single line. Anna stopped playing, stunned. That was the first time I saw hope flicker again, she recalled. The change didn't happen overnight. It was more like dawn, slow, almost imperceptible. Maria began to pray again, not for healing, but for meaning. She whispered, "If I can't walk, then use me as I am." She started offering her pain for others. For cancer patients her mother treated. For soldiers Jorge knew who battled PTSD. For teens in her parish who struggled silently with depression. Her bed, once a place of despair, began to feel like an altar. Every groan of pain became a prayer. Every sleepless night of vigil. Every tear an offering. People around her noticed. Nurses testified that when Maria smiled, despite her agony, it changed the atmosphere of the ward. We'd walk in exhausted from back-to-back shifts, one nurse explained. But she'd thank us when she couldn't even move. It humbled us. Her online journey began during these months. Anna convinced her to record short reflections from her bed. A prayer, a verse, a thought. At first, Maria resisted. Who would listen to a broken girl? But the videos spread. Comments flooded in from across America. Veterans, single mothers, high school students. One message read, "I was going to end my life tonight, but I saw your video. If you can keep going, so can I." Slowly, Maria began to see her suffering differently, not as punishment, but as participation. If Christ carried a cross, she once told Father Michael, then maybe this bed is mine. Her transformation wasn't dramatic. It was daily. Each morning, she chose to live when despair whispered to die. Chose to pray when silence felt empty. Chose to believe when evidence seemed against her. By the second year, her surrender was no longer just survival. It was a mission. Maria's life was still marked by tubes, pain, and immobility. But her soul had shifted. Her despair had turned into offering. Her bed had turned into a pulpit. As one parishioner put it, we went to comfort her, but we left comforted. We thought she was broken, but she was the strongest one among us. The nights were the hardest. Houston hospitals quieted after midnight, but for Maria, silence only made the pain louder. Her body refused rest. Nerves fired like lightning. Muscles spasmed without mercy. Nurses adjusted pillows, dimmed lights, whispered encouragement, but nothing erased the agony. Yet, it was in those sleepless hours that something mysterious began. The first time, she told no one. She later recalled lying in darkness, whispering the rosary when she sensed another presence in the room. Not a doctor, not a nurse, something gentler. She felt as though a mother's hand brushed her hair and the air filled with the faint fragrance of roses. It was peace, she confided quietly to Father Michael. Not the peace of medicine or silence, but the kind that makes you believe you're not alone. At first, she thought it was imagination. Pain can play tricks, she reasoned, but then it happened again and again. Each time, the same sweetness, the same stillness. Slowly, she began to believe it was Our Lady visiting her in the quiet. Her mother noticed a change. Elalina would walk into the hospital room after a long shift and see Maria's face, normally twisted in pain, suddenly soft, radiant, almost childlike. I knew something holy was happening, Elalina later said, even if I couldn't explain it. One evening, Anna sat by her bedside reading from the Psalms when Maria's eyes widened. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Anna shook her head. Maria smiled faintly. "The choir. It's like music, but not with voices. It's love." Anna swore that for a moment the room itself seemed lighter, warmer. Word began to spread among parishioners. Some dismissed it as morphine dreams, fevered illusions. A skeptical physician muttered about neurological responses to trauma. But others believed. They came not to witness spectacle, but to sit quietly, hoping to touch the peace Maria now carried. Father Michael was cautious. He asked careful questions, discerning whether these experiences were authentic or deceptive. But Maria never exaggerated, never sought attention. "If it's from God, let him decide," she told him. "If it's not, let it pass." That humility convinced him that something genuine was unfolding. The visions deepened. On one occasion, Maria described being led, she wasn't sure how, into a place of shadows and fire. She recognized it as purgatory, a realm of longing souls. "They weren't angry," she said softly. "They just looked at me with eyes that begged for prayer." From that night on, she offered every spasm, every sleepless hour for those who had no one to pray for them. Other times she glimpsed light, so bright it could not be described. Choirs of saints united in harmony, a home she longed for but knew she wasn't ready to enter. After such moments, nurses noted her breathing calmed, her eyes sparkled, and even hardened skeptics admitted the atmosphere of her room felt different. But these consolations didn't erase the suffering. In fact, her pain often returned sharper, more relentless. Yet now it was wrapped in meaning. "It hurts," she admitted to her mother one night. "But it's not empty anymore." Her caregivers saw the transformation. One nurse, raised without faith, confessed, "I came to treat a patient, but I left with questions about God I'd buried for years." A parish volunteer who once doubted miracles said, "When she spoke, I stopped arguing." It wasn't persuasion. It was presence. Maria herself never claimed holiness. "I'm just a broken girl in a hospital bed," she would insist. But those who visited saw more. They saw a soul who, though chained by suffering, walked further than any of them. Her room, once sterile and heavy with despair, became something like a chapel. Visitors lowered their voices instinctively. Some lit candles at the hospital chapel downstairs before coming up, as if preparing to step into sacred ground. And so while Houston bustled outside with traffic, business, and noise, a quiet miracle unfolded inside a single room. Not the miracle of sudden healing, but of consolation. Glimpses of heaven piercing nights of pain. Maria never sought it. She never asked for visions. But they came, and in their wake, she found courage to continue. For her, it wasn't proof to show the world. It was simply a reminder God had not left her. Not in the accident, not in the silence, not even in the fire of unrelenting pain. In the stillness of night, she was no longer alone. She was with heaven. By the 15th year of her illness, Maria's body had become a battlefield. Her spine no longer supported her. Muscles had wasted away until her frame seemed almost fragile against the hospital sheets. Pressure sores deepened despite constant care. And now, even the simple act of eating had turned into torment. At first, her mother tried every recipe. Soups from childhood, smoothies packed with vitamins, even broth blessed at church. But every bite triggered violent nausea. A sip of water left her doubled over in pain. Doctors ran test after test, prescribed supplements, adjusted feeding tubes. Nothing worked. Her system is shutting down, one physician admitted. It's only a matter of time. The family braced for the inevitable. Jorge, once stoic, wept quietly in the hospital parking lot. Eloanina prayed more desperately than ever. Anna confessed. I thought we were going to lose her. She looked like a candle burning out. But then something remarkable began. Though Maria could no longer take nourishment in the natural sense, she did not weaken. In fact, those closest to her noticed a strange strength rising. She should have been fading, a nurse later recalled. But instead, she seemed sustained. The turning point came when Father Michael petitioned the bishop for special permission to bring Maria Holy Communion more frequently. In those days, even devout Catholics often received only weekly or monthly. But Maria's hunger was not for food. It was for Christ himself. The bishop granted it. From that day forward, the Eucharist became her only nourishment. Each morning, when the priest entered the hospital room carrying the pyx, something shifted. Visitors described the atmosphere as reverent, almost weightless. Machines still beeped. The smell of antiseptic still lingered. Yet a hush fell when the host was raised. Her face, drawn and pale from years of suffering, would soften the moment the wafer touched her tongue. Her breathing slowed, her eyes dulled by pain, filled with light. It was like watching someone touch heaven, Anna said. The rest of us were starving for hope, and somehow she was feeding us. 2. After communion, Maria often fell into deep silence for hours. Not sleep, something different. Nurses observed her vital signs steady, her pain easing slightly, as if her entire being was at rest in ways medicine couldn't measure. Skeptics didn't believe it. Some doctors began to suspect trickery, perhaps food smuggled in when no one was watching. They ordered longer observations, restricted visitors, charted every intake. But the results remained the same. Maria lived without ordinary food, sustained only by the bread of life. One doctor, not a believer, finally admitted, I don't know what's happening. Science can't explain it. Maria herself never dramatized it. When asked, she simply whispered, He is enough. For her, the Eucharist was not a symbol or ritual. It was survival, peace, and fire all at once. She often told Father Michael, it isn't the absence of food that matters. It's the presence of God. Her confessor later shared that in those moments after communion, she would pray silently for hours, offering her union with Christ for the world, for prisoners, for refugees, for those abandoned in nursing homes. Her bed, he said, was no longer just a sick room. It was an altar where heaven and earth met. Others began to feel it too. Nurses who weren't Catholic found themselves standing still during communion, tears welling without knowing why. Family members reported that after Mass at her bedside, the entire house felt calmer for days. Parishioners who visited described the experience as unforgettable, like stepping into something sacred. And so, while her body wasted away, Maria endured. Not only endured, she radiated. Her weakness became witness. Her hunger became testimony. She once told Anna, the Eucharist is the only food that doesn't leave me empty. For a nation accustomed to medical explanations and quick solutions, her survival was a quiet miracle. There were no cameras, no headlines, just a broken girl in a hospital bed, living on nothing but Christ. In the heart of Houston, surrounded by machines and fluorescent lights, Maria revealed a truth ancient yet ever. Man shall not live by bread alone. By the time Maria had spent nearly 2 decades confined to her bed, people no longer came to see her out of pity. They came because word had spread. Something happened in that small hospital room that no one could explain. Neighbors arrived first, women from the parish bringing flowers, elderly men from the food pantry carrying stories. Then strangers began showing up. A single mother who had read about Maria's faith on Facebook, a soldier recently home from Afghanistan, a high school girl battling depression. All of them walked in with burdens. Few left the same. It wasn't her appearance that drew them. By then, Maria's body bore the scars of years of illness. Her limbs were twisted, her skin marked by sores, her voice weak and uneven. You didn't come for beauty, one visitor later said. You came because when she looked at you, it felt like she saw the part of you you'd been hiding all along. Anna described it best. Maria had this way of listening. She didn't rush to fill silence. She just looked at you, really looked, and somehow you ended up telling her the thing you swore you'd never say out loud. One young man came joking with friends, ready to mock. But before he could speak, Maria turned her eyes to him and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid of being like your father. You're not him." The boy froze. No one in the room had known his father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family. He left shaken. Weeks later, he returned alone, asking Maria to pray for him. Months later, he entered RCIA at the parish. Stories like this multiplied. A businessman confessed shady deals after Maria quietly told him, "God wants you free, not chained." A young woman tormented by scrupulosity found relief when Maria said, "Your sin is forgiven. Stop punishing yourself." Priests themselves sought her guidance. One diocesan seminarian admitted, "She named the exact fear that kept me from saying yes to God." How could she know? "I never told anyone." Ella Lenina, her mother, often marveled. She barely spoke above a whisper, but her words carried weight. "I realized it wasn't my daughter speaking. It was God through her." Even the Bishop of Galveston, Houston, sent troubled clergy to visit, not to test her, but to be restored. They entered skeptically, left quietly, humbled. Maria never claimed anything extraordinary. When praised, she simply shook her head. "I have nothing. If God speaks, it's because he chooses the weak." But her humility only made her influence stronger. Her ministry reached further through letters and later emails. Since long conversations exhausted her, she dictated short messages. Simple, direct, piercing. "Don't give up on your marriage. Trust God in this diagnosis. Your child is not lost forever." Those words traveled farther than she ever could. Shared across parishes, read in prayer groups, treasured in homes. Social media amplified it. Clips from her bedside, Anna reading her words aloud while Maria listened, went viral. A hashtag began trending. "Maria prays with us." People from New York to California sent intentions, often from hospital rooms of their own. To the world, she was just another patient in Houston. To those who encountered her, she became a compass. A compass that didn't lecture, didn't judge, but pointed quietly, steadily toward God. Nurses testified that when shifts dragged, they stopped by her room, not for medical duty, but for strength. One confessed, "I was addicted to painkillers." Maria looked at me and said, "You don't have to carry this alone." That night, I threw the pills away. Her room became something like a confessional without walls. People arrived restless, ashamed, even mocking. They left lighter, freer, often in tears. Maria never traveled the country. She never stood at a pulpit, but from her bed, she touched more lives than many preachers ever could. As Father Michael reflected, the church has always had great teachers, but every once in a while, God gives us a soul who doesn't teach with words, but with presence. Maria was one of those souls. In an America that prided itself on independence and productivity, she taught a shocking truth that sometimes the most broken life can guide the rest of us home. For years, Maria's room had been a place of light. Visitors left with peace they couldn't explain. Nurses whispered that something sacred lingered there. Friends said her prayers carried them through their darkest nights. Even Maria herself, though racked with pain, felt carried by moments of consolation, the fragrance of roses, the sense of a motherly presence, the nearness of heaven. But one day, without warning, it all stopped. The visions ceased. The sweetness vanished. Prayer, once a river of peace, became dry desert. Maria still clasped her rosary, still received the Eucharist. But where there had once been warmth, now there was silence. At first, she told no one. She feared it was her imagination failing, or worse, punishment. She smiled through visits, whispering encouragements as she always had. But late at night, when Elena held her hand, Maria admitted, "I don't feel him anymore, Mama. I pray, but it's like the ceiling swallows my words." Father Michael recognized it immediately. The dark night of the soul. Many saints walk this road. He explained gently, God hides his face not to abandon us, but to purify us, to teach us to love him for who he is, not for the consolations he gives. But knowing theology did not make the experience easier. And I noticed the difference, too. Her eyes didn't shine the same way she remembered. She kept praying, but it was like she was pushing through fog. I asked if she was okay, and she just said, "Keep singing. Maybe the song will reach him when I can't." For years, Maria endured this hidden battle. Outwardly, she was still the same gentle soul visitors admired. Inwardly, she wrestled with despair. Questions gnawed at her heart. Had I been deceived? Were the visions nothing more than dreams? Did God finally abandon me after all these years? The temptation wasn't to sin. It was to quit, to stop believing her suffering had any meaning, to give in to the voice whispering, "It's useless. You're forgotten." Her father, Jorge, admitted later that he saw her lips move in prayer with tears streaming down her cheeks. "It broke me," he said. "I wanted to fix it, to give her back the God she felt she lost, but I couldn't. All I could do was kneel outside her room and pray for her when she couldn't feel her own prayers." And yet she did not stop. Each morning she asked for the Eucharist. Each evening she fingered her worn rosary beads. She no longer felt joy in them, but she chose them anyway. "Faith," she whispered to Anna, "isn't a feeling, it's a decision." Visitors continued to arrive, unaware of her inner dryness. She encouraged them with the same tenderness as before. But her encouragement now came at great cost. Every word of hope was wrestled from silence. Every smile carved from darkness. One veteran who came to see her later said, "I thought I was the broken one. But then I realized her strength wasn't in what she felt. It was in what she chose. And that taught me more than any sermon." The silent trial lasted years. It stretched so long that even Elena doubted. "I begged God to give her back some signs," she confessed, but none came. It was like watching someone walk through a storm with no compass. And yet, little by little, dawn returned. On an Easter morning, as she received communion, Maria felt something stir deep within her. Not the visions of old, not music, not roses, but presence, solid, quiet, undeniable. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "You never left." That day she told Father Michael, "I understand now. Love is not measured by what I feel, but by what I choose when I feel nothing." The lesson was costly. The silence had nearly broken her. But in that emptiness, her love reached its most heroic form. Not in ecstasy, but in endurance, not in light, but in darkness. And so, when visitors continued to ask how she survived, she smiled gently and said, "Sometimes heaven is loud, sometimes heaven is silent. Either way, he is still here." Maria never asked for miracles. She never prayed for signs or wonders. Her only request was the strength to endure one more day, one more night. Yet quietly, without announcement, small miracles began to unfold around her bed. It started one winter when the family pantry was almost empty. Medical bills had drained their savings, and Jorge's construction jobs had slowed. Elalina confessed she worried how they would feed the younger siblings. But Maria insisted they share what little remained with a struggling neighbor. Against logic, Elalina obeyed. The next week, bags of groceries appeared on their porch, anonymous, overflowing. "We didn't tell a soul about our need," Jorge later recalled. But somehow food kept coming. Enough for us and enough to give away. Another time a woman from the parish brought her sick child to visit. The boy burned with fever that medicine couldn't break. Desperate, the mother begged Maria, "Just pray over him." Too weak to move, Maria touched a damp cloth to her lips, traced the sign of the cross on the boy's forehead, and whispered prayer. Days later, the fever vanished. The doctors called it coincidence. The mother called it mercy. Stories spread quietly through the community. People began arriving with small objects, rosaries, scarves, photos of loved ones, asking Maria to bless them with a prayer. Some left healed of chronic pain, others freed from addictions, others simply at peace. Not every prayer ended in a cure, but many testified to something even deeper: reconciliation with God, forgiveness long delayed, a peace they had never known. One of the most striking moments came with a group of high school boys who had come intending to mock. They had seen the videos online, heard the stories, and decided to prove it was all exaggeration. But when they entered her room, Maria looked at each one with quiet intensity and softly named the secret wounds of their lives. Fathers who abandoned them, fears of failure, hidden addictions. The laughter died instantly. One left in tears. Two returned weeks later, asking to join the parish youth group. Anna, who witnessed that scene, said it wasn't magic. It wasn't show. It was like the Holy Spirit spoke through her straight to their hearts. Even skeptics began to soften. A local journalist once came to write a piece on the sick girl, inspiring social media. She expected sentimentality. Instead, she left shaken. "She didn't try to impress me," the journalist admitted later. "She just asked me one question: what's keeping you from forgiving your father?" And I broke. She knew nothing about me, but she saw me. Maria never claimed power. In fact, she was the first to doubt herself. If anything good happened, she often whispered, "It's God, not me." But the more she deflected attention, the more stories multiplied. The greatest miracle, however, wasn't physical. It was the atmosphere. People spoke of walking into her room with heaviness and leaving with lightness. Veterans haunted by war said the nightmares quieted. Couples on the brink of divorce held hands again. Estranged siblings reconciled after decades of silence. She didn't fix our problems, one visitor said, but she made us believe our suffering wasn't wasted. That alone changed everything. Nurses also testified. One recalled, "I was burned out. I'd lost compassion. But after an hour in Maria's room, something melted. I wanted to care again." Father Michael, reflecting on these countless encounters, said, "The miracle was not that she healed bodies. It was that she healed hearts. She turned suffering into a doorway through which others encounter God." By the time word spread beyond Houston, pilgrims came quietly from other states. Some drove hours, others flew. They didn't come expecting spectacle. They came because they had heard of a bedridden woman who could not walk, could not eat, could barely speak, but whose presence was enough to change a life. And so, though Maria never left her room, her reach extended far beyond its walls. The broken girl confined to a hospital bed became the center of stories that rippled across parishes, hospitals, even prisons. Not through power or fame, but through the quiet, unexpected miracles that flowed from surrender. As Anna put it simply, she gave the world what the world could never give her: hope. From childhood, Maria had loved the Virgin Mary. In her family's Houston home, a framed image of Our Lady of Guadalupe hung above the kitchen table. Each morning before school, Elalina would kiss her fingers and touch the frame, whispering, "Queen's Madre, take care of us, Mother." Maria grew up believing that Mary wasn't far away. She was close like family. After the accident, that closeness became lifeline. Long nights of pain often left Maria restless, unable to sleep, her body trembling with spasms. In those hours, she would clutch her rosary and imagine Mary at the foot of her bed. Just as she once stood at the foot of the cross, she knew what it meant. Maria told Anna to watch suffering you can't change and to stay anyway. Her caregivers noticed a difference on Marian feast days. Elalina recalled on the Feast of the Annunciation. Her face seemed lighter, softer. It was as if the pain loosened its grip for a while. One nurse described walking into her room on the Feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe and smelling a sudden fragrance of roses, though no flowers were present. "It gave me chills," the nurse admitted. "I knew I was witnessing something holy." Maria began a simple practice. Each bead of the rosary became not just a prayer, but a meditation. On one bead, she prayed for single mothers in her parish. On another, for veterans battling trauma. On another still, for immigrants seeking safety at the Texas border. Each Hail Mary was anchored in the real struggles of people around her. Parishioners who visited often joined her in this living rosary, and many later said it changed the way they prayed. Father Michael noticed the Marian thread weaving through her spirituality. She didn't speak of Mary in visions or revelations, he explained. She lived Mary, her patience, her surrender, her courage. For Maria, Mary was not a distant queen, but a present companion. During one particularly severe night of pain, Elalina found her daughter whispering softly, "Madre, stay with me. Don't let me give up." The next morning, despite sleepless agony, Maria managed a faint smile and said, "She was here, Mama." She stayed. Anna remembered another moment vividly. Maria had been too weak to speak for hours. Then suddenly she opened her eyes, looked at the small statue of Guadalupe by her bed, and whispered, "I'm not alone." For Anna, it was the first time she truly understood the Catholic devotion to Mary, not as a distraction from Christ, but as a doorway to him. Word of Maria's Marian devotion spread through the parish. Mothers brought their children to pray the rosary in her room. Youth groups adopted her meditative style, linking each prayer to a concrete act of charity. Even those who struggled with faith admitted that being in her presence during a Marian prayer brought unexpected peace. Her confessor once asked why she clung so fiercely to Mary. Maria's answer was simple: "Because Mary teaches me how to suffer with love." She often explained that if the sinless Mother of God could endure Calvary with trust, then she too, broken, small, ordinary, could endure her own cross with the same surrender. One visitor, a young woman battling cancer, said Maria's devotion gave her courage. She told me, Mary stood by her son in silence. You don't have to be strong every moment. You just have to stay with him. That changed how I faced my treatments. Even skeptics felt something. A social worker who claimed she wasn't religious accompanied a patient on a visit. She later confessed, I don't know about saints or visions, but in that room while Maria prayed the rosary, I felt safe, like a mother was holding us both. Maria never bragged about mystical experiences. She rarely spoke about them at all, but those closest to her suspected that in her loneliest hours, the Mother of God came to her in ways words could not capture. As the years passed, Maria's devotion to Mary deepened. Her writings often ended with the same line, Under your mantle, I rest. In the noise of America, where faith often seemed drowned out by politics, technology, and distraction, Maria offered something radically simple, the gentle love of a daughter for her mother. And through that love, others rediscovered their own. By her mid-40s, Maria had lived nearly 3 decades in a bed that became her cross and her pulpit. Her body, frail and hollowed by time, was little more than skin stretched over bone. Every breath was effort. Every movement, even with help, was agony. Yet those who entered her room in Houston spoke not of despair, but of serenity. Friends sensed at first that her time was drawing near. Anna recalled, she didn't say she was afraid. She said she was ready. She told me, all my life has been waiting to see him face to face. 3 months before her passing, Maria quietly confided to Father Michael during confession that she felt her end approaching. He asked if she was afraid. She shook her head gently and whispered, Death isn't the end, it's the fulfillment. Her mother struggled more than she did. Elalina often sat by the bed, rosary slipping through trembling fingers. Mija, I don't know how to let you go, she wept. Maria pressed her mother's hand with what little strength remained. Mom, death won't separate us. It will only bring us closer in him. Her father, Jorge, the man who had built ramps and worked double shifts, couldn't hold back tears as he stood by her side. In his gruff construction worker voice, he muttered, You've been stronger than me this whole time. Maria smiled faintly. No, Papa. We've all been carried. As Holy Week approached, her pain intensified, but so too did her peace. Those who visited described the room as hushed, like a sanctuary. Neighbors stopped by just to sit silently near her bed, sensing that something sacred was unfolding. Nurses who had cared for her for years confessed they felt like they were standing at holy ground. On the morning of April 14th, Maria made 2 requests. She asked for the small crucifix she had held since the night of the accident and for the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe to be placed at her bedside. I want to leave this world holding their hands, she whispered. That afternoon, Father Michael came with the sacraments, surrounded by her parents, siblings, Anna, and a few parish friends. Maria received confession, the Eucharist, and the anointing of the sick. Those present testified that the atmosphere shifted. The machines still hummed. The Houston traffic still roared outside, yet the room felt suspended in grace. Her final prayer was the 23rd Psalm. With weak voice, but steady tone, she began, The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want, she faltered, then continued, Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. In that moment, witnesses say her face changed, the lines of suffering softened. A light seemed to radiate from her eyes, and as she breathed her last, more sigh than struggle, a fragrance filled the room, faint but unmistakable, like roses blooming in spring. Elalina cried out, clinging to her daughter's hand. Anna collapsed in tears, but later said, I wasn't only crying in grief. I was crying because I knew she had entered glory. Father Michael stood in silence, overwhelmed, whispering, Well done, good and faithful servant. Maria's face, so long marked by pain, appeared young again, peaceful, as if the suffering had finally released its grip. Those who saw her body after death testified that it no longer looked broken. It looked restored. Word spread quickly through the parish and beyond. They didn't say Maria had died. They said, Maria has gone home. In the days that followed, hundreds came to pay respects. Not just Catholics, but Baptists, Methodists, even those with no religion at all. Each person carried a story of prayers answered, of hope restored, of lives touched by a bedridden woman who had never stopped believing. Anna put it best at the vigil. Her body never left this bed, but her soul traveled farther than any of us. and now she's where she always longed to be. News of Maria's passing traveled quickly through Houston. Within hours, parish phones rang nonstop. By nightfall, candles flickered outside St. Joseph's Church, lined along the steps by parishioners and strangers alike. They didn't say she died. They said she went home. At the wake, Elalina sat quietly clutching her daughter's rosary. "She taught me how to be strong," she whispered, "and I was supposed to be the mother." Jorge, standing beside her, admitted through tears, "I spent my life building houses, but Maria built something I couldn't. Faith in people's hearts." Her story spread beyond the parish. Local media picked it up. The bedridden woman who inspired a city. Within weeks, Catholic blogs and podcasts across the country echoed her name. A documentary filmmaker from Dallas came to interview those who knew her. "I expected a story about tragedy," he later confessed. "What I found was resurrection." Anna, her lifelong friend, became the keeper of Maria's writings. Hundreds of short reflections, prayers, and dictated letters. She compiled them online under the title Maria's Mantle. Within months, thousands subscribed. A mother from Chicago wrote, "Your friend saved my son. He was ready to give up, but Maria's words gave him courage." A prisoner in Louisiana sent a letter saying he prayed the rosary again for the first time in 20 years because of her. Father Michael noted that even after death, Maria's influence only grew stronger. She never sought fame. She never traveled, never preached. And yet her reach is wider than many of us priests who spent decades in ministry. That is the mystery of God's grace. Stories of healing multiplied. A blind child reportedly regained partial sight after touching a rosary Maria had prayed with. A young woman who battled infertility conceived after visiting Maria's grave. More often, however, the miracles were quieter. Families reconciled. Addicts found freedom. Lukewarm Catholics returned to Mass. But perhaps her greatest legacy was the way she changed how people saw suffering. In a culture obsessed with productivity and strength, Maria taught that brokenness could be holy, that surrender could be powerful. As one Houston nurse put it, "I thought she was my patient, but really she was my teacher." Her image began appearing in stained glass windows of Catholic hospitals across Texas, not standing tall in glory, but lying in a bed, crucifix in hand, eyes lifted toward heaven. A saint not in motion, but in stillness. Even non-Catholics felt her impact. A Baptist pastor from Dallas attended her vigil and later preached to his congregation. "There's a Catholic woman who never left her bed, and yet she ministered to more souls than I ever will." That's the kind of faith we all need. In 2024, the Archdiocese quietly opened a preliminary inquiry into her life, gathering testimonies of those touched by her witness. Though the Church moves slowly, many already call her the patroness of the suffering in the digital age. Her family still lives in the modest Houston home, the framed image of Our Lady of Guadalupe still hanging above the table. Elalina often sets an extra candle before it and whispers, "Take care of her, Madre." She believes Mary now answers that prayer in reverse. Maria intercedes for them. Every year on April 14th, crowds gather at St. Joseph's for a memorial mass. Veterans, single mothers, teenagers, the chronically ill, they all come. Some bring flowers, others bring letters of thanks, but all carry the same conviction that the life of one broken woman had shown them God's nearness. Anna summarized it best. She didn't leave behind money or degrees or a long resume. She left behind faith, and that faith is still alive in every person who sat by her bed and walked away changed. Maria's story, born from tragedy, had become testimony. Not of defeat, but of surrender. Not of death, but of love stronger than death. And in Houston, they still say her name softly. Maria, the girl who turned suffering into light. In the quiet hours of our own suffering, when hospital rooms feel cold, when nights stretch too long, when hope seems far away, we now remember Maria. She was not a celebrity, not a scholar, not a public figure. She was simply a daughter, a friend, a believer who chose to love God from her bed of pain. And because of that choice, countless lives were changed. Her story is not just a memory. It is a reminder that our worth is not measured by what we can do, but by who we are in God's eyes. A reminder that every act of surrender, however small, carries weight in heaven. And a reminder that even in silence, God is never absent. So tonight, we offer a prayer. Maria of Houston, sister in faith, you who bore decades of suffering with courage, teach us how to carry our crosses. You who prayed for soldiers, mothers, and the forgotten, pray now for us. When our own nights grow heavy, remind us that we are not alone. When we cannot feel God's presence, help us to trust that He is still near. When despair whispers that our lives have no meaning, remind us, as you reminded so many, that even hidden lives can shine with grace. We ask that you intercede for the sick who feel abandoned, for the young who have lost hope, for the families weighed down by grief. Teach us to offer our struggles with love, to transform pain into prayer, and to believe that nothing surrendered to God is ever wasted. May your witness inspire us to see the beauty hidden within our struggles and to walk with faith until the day we too are called home. Amen. And perhaps the greatest way to honor Maria's legacy is not only to tell her story, but to live it quietly, faithfully, with love that endures even in the dark. If this story touched your heart, help us share it. Like this video and subscribe to Touched by Grace so that together we can continue bringing stories of faith, hope, and grace to a world in need of it.